second to last meeting. The plus session will take place next week. This is why the objective for today is to finish the financial forecastings, which means that on the following week we will put it all together and we will be able to compare, hopefully, on one hand, the budget of our investment, on the other hand, the net operating cash flows that would be resulting from our financial forecasting. And in doing so, we will build some financial indicators, and based on their values, we should be able to at least formulate an opinion concerning the financial feasibility of the investment. The last thing that we will do will be to simulate what happens if certain factors change their values. What would be the impact of that on the financial indicators? So that's for the following week. For today, the objective would be to finish the financial forecasting. As I said, we forecasted the revenues last time we met. Today, we are trying to do the forecasting of the charges. We are going to put them all in an operating budget, and at the end of our meeting we will try to turn that operating budget into a table of let's say cash flows from operations. You will see. So I'm going to share my screen in a moment. Hopefully you already see it. So this is the sheet in which I did the financial forecasting for the revenues for the company we were working on, the company that would be producing apple juice. And I need to continue with the forecasting of the charges. So I'm reminding you that we are trying to do the financial planning for the first 5 years of operations. Again, for me, this is my investment budget. This is right here my implementation chart. So that is, if I would decide to do the investment, it would take me, of course, according to this planning, it would take me 24 months, 2 years to implement the investment. And once the investment is implemented, I would imagine the owner of this infrastructure containing land, buildings, equipment. I think I also had a truck there. No truck, just a forklift. So I would be the owner of this infrastructure and I would start its operation. What we are doing right now is to plan the first 5 years of operations from the financial point of view. We planned the revenues and now we need to forecast the charges. Now, by definition, an expense, a charge, represents what? The monetary value of a consumption. So obviously, we configured, each of us has configured our operating cycle. For me, this means, of course, always buying apples, storing them, processing them through different operations with different types of equipment, getting to the end product, the apple juice, storing it, selling it, collecting the cash, and then with the cash, restarting the whole process all over again, and of course doing this again and again and again. This is my operating cycle. Unfortunately, because of course it's not by my will necessarily, but unfortunately, to be able to sustain, on one hand, I need to sustain this operating process in order to generate these revenues, those that I have, we have in front of us on the screen. So these revenues, at this point, we see them as objectives. Now, in order to get to these objectives each year, for instance, for the first year, in order to do sales of apple juice of 200,000 euros, unfortunately, as I was saying, I need to sustain that operating cycle. And again, unfortunately, within the operation the operating cycle within the process, we need to consume different types of resources. For sure, we need to consume apples as raw materials, but at the same time, we need to consume electricity, for the functioning of the equipment. We need labor force. I'm not really sure how to say it, what it is really that we are consuming, the time, the energy, the effort of the employees, whatever it is. We need to even consume public services of different types. We can debate on that. We might need to consume different types of services from maybe an accounting company, maybe from a company that is into promotion services, and so on. So, my point is that we need to consume different types of resources, and we register within our accounting these consumptions under the form of charges. So, by definition, the charge is the monetary value of a consumption. For instance, I may consume, I don't know, 10,000 kilos of apples as raw materials. When I say 10,000 kilos or 10 tons, that's the quantity. Of course, within the accounting system, I'm not registering quantities. I'm registering everything uh, in a certain currency. And in the Romanian accounting, we need to do the registrations in Romanian leis. So I'm registering really the charge as an expression of the consumption. I can't register 10,000 kilos of apples, but if I bought the 10,000 kilos of apples for, let's say, 15,000 lei, when I consume the apples, I will register the charge with the raw materials of 15,000 lei. So please remember that the charge is not the equivalent of an acquisition. It's not even the equivalent of a payment, because the charge really is the expression under the form of currency, of course, the expression of a consumption. What are the consequences of this? They are the following. I might be buying, I don't know, let's say 100,000 worth of apples in 2024. So I buying them. Let's say that I'm signing the contract with the supplier in a first uh, stage. Just for signing the contract for supplying the apples, it doesn't mean that I'm registering any charges with the apples. Afterwards, let's say that the supplier delivers the apples, again, of 100,000 lei in value. I'm not registering the charge with apples just because they were delivered to me. Maybe later on, maybe he gives me a trade loan of for a period of maybe 30 days. So I'm not paying right now at delivery, I'm paying in 1 month. The month passes and I'm paying the 100,000 lei. But just because I'm paying for the apples does not mean that I'm registering the charge of 100,000 lei with the apples. Why? Because the charge, by definition, as I was saying, is not the delivery of the apples, not the payment of the apples. The charge is the expression of the consumption. At some point, I it can be at any moment. Many companies store the apples if they have storing facilities, warehouses. They might be storing them for maybe 8, 9, 10, sometimes maybe for even 12 months. So maybe the apples were bought in 2024, and at some point in July, August 2025, someone will go to the warehouse and take, let's say, 10,000 kilos of apples. At that point, the accountant will register, well, based on that, based on taking the apples from the storage, from the warehouse. The accountant will register in the financial accounting system something like 601 equals 301. So charges with raw materials equals the raw materials account inventory. So basically the value of the balance of the inventory, the raw material account reduces, and we are registering the consumption of the apples of whatever I said, 10,000 kilos might mean 15,000 lei. We are registering it as charge. So again, the charge is the expression of the consumption, not the payment or the acquisition of any type of resource. This is true for any other type of consumption. This is what we are trying to estimate, to forecast the different types of charges, the different types of consumptions. Whenever I start the forecasting of charges, I start by making a list of types of resources that my operating cycle would make me consume. And in this case, for sure, I will need to consume apples, so I will need to forecast charges with raw materials, with apples as raw materials. I probably, for sure, I need to forecast charges with the packaging. Remember that I'm planning to sell the juice in the bag-in-box system. Then, for sure, I will register charges with the gross wages, then with the social contributions associated to the gross wages. For sure, I will register charges with the depreciation of the equipment and of the building. Well, not only that, I believe that in my infrastructure, I also have furniture, the forklift, and some software. So basically the depreciation of all intangible and tangible assets, with the exception of the land. For the land, we are not calculating any depreciation charges. We can come back to the subject later on. Other types of consumptions and therefore of charges. If I'm not planning to employ an accountant, and I'm not, and I would imagine that this will also be true for you, we will have to outsource the accounting activities. So this obviously means that we will register charges with the accounting services each month. Then I'm sure that we will need to sustain charges with the telecommunication services like phone and internet access. I would imagine that all of us forecasted within our marketing mix, within our promotion policy. We planned for some type of promotion services. We need to forecast that as well. Then, as we probably all have land in our infrastructures, we will need to sustain the charges with the taxes on the land taxes. And at the same time, we need to pay taxes for the buildings. Those of you that also have trucks, cars, you will need to pay taxes on them as well. Again, if you have cars or trucks, you also need insurance. So you also need to forecast the charges with the insurance policies. And it depends. Maybe some consumables. Those of you, it's not my case here with the company that produces juice. I'm not planning to sell any merchandise, but those of you that do, We'll need to forecast the charges with the merchandise. And I guess those are the most probable ones. Uh, just to make an idea of it, I would say that most startups will register about, well, somewhere between 20 and 25 different types of charges within the operating activity. Because somehow outside the operating activity, we will also have the interest charges. Remember that all of us took into consideration loans, bank loans, I mean, as well as lease contracts to finance our investments. So for both of those, we will need to register interest charges. And for the bank loan, we've estimated administration fees. That's it here. I did it at least, but I imagine that most of you have used the same system. Uh, while the interest charges are financial charges, so they are not considered to be generated directly by the operating cycle, even though we are using the loans to finance the investments for the operating cycle. From the accounting point of view, the interest charges are financial charges. As you remember, within the profit and loss account, we have two activities: the operating activity and the financial activity. I'm not saying financing, I'm saying financial activity. And the interest charges are belonging to the financial activity. However, the administration fees for the same bank loan from the accounting point of view are viewed as operating charges. So there might be other types of charges from one, of course, business to the other, from one idea to the other. But I want to point out that, at least in terms of values, although you will probably have, as I was saying, some 20, 25 different types of charges, you will see that you will have about 3 or 4 types of charges that will be larger in value, and all the other ones which will be much, much, much less important. And the charges that will be very, very important in value are the following. For companies that produce something, such as my own, I'm producing apple juice. So for companies that produce finished goods, you will see that I don't want to say all the time, but normally all the time. The most important charges in terms of value, I mean, let's say yearly value, will be the charges with raw materials. So remember that the raw materials are materials that we are consuming and we are integrating directly within the structure of the finished goods. So you need to produce finished goods to say that you are consuming raw materials. But whenever you do produce finished goods, you will have charges with raw materials. And again, statistically speaking, for a company that produces finished goods, the charges with the raw materials will be the most important ones in terms of overall value. Just to give you an idea, of course, it will depend from one field of activity to the other and from one company to the other, but in many, many cases, for companies that produce something, the charges with raw materials get to somewhere around 40% of the total of the charges, about there, just to give you a general idea. Then on the second position, we usually have the charges with the gross wages. I say usually. Remember, I was telling you at the beginning of our course that from those about 1.4, 1.5 million commercial companies in Romania, 79% of them so more than three quarters, 79% of them have 0, 1, or 2 employees. So not many. However, again, for a company that produces finished goods, it usually needs to have employees. I mean, you might think any company needs employees, otherwise, how would it work? In many very small companies, the owner works even though he does not become an official employee of the company. But leaving this exception aside, a company that produces finished goods will generally have employees, and the charges with the gross wages, of course, for the employees, are usually second in value after the charges with the raw materials, usually. Then probably on the third place might be the charges with the depreciation. Now it depends. It depends a lot of course, the value of the equipment that the company owns and the value of maybe the software systems and the buildings. In our case, for sure, we are starting from, I would say, considerable investments, because all of us have planned investments of over 200,000 euros, which is a lot for a startup. It really is. So for us, for sure, the depreciation charges will be important. But even statistically speaking, for many companies, the depreciation charges are somewhere on the third place, after the charges with the raw materials and the charges with the gross wages. However, most of the startups, the vast majority of them, do not own buildings, land or buildings. And the simple reason for that is that they don't have the financing sources required to buy land to build constructions. Again, in most of the cases, some of them don't even need buildings. Some of them might involve activities maybe at the headquarters of the clients. But again, from those that do need headquarters, the vast majority of them, the startups, I mean, don't have buildings and land in their property, and they usually rent. They usually rent. And because of that, the rent charges are also important in these so many cases. So usually the rent charges are there, maybe on the fourth place. And there's the fifth type of charge that might also be important in value, the charge with the merchandise. You register charges with the merchandise when you are into commerce, which means you are buying merchandise and you are reselling it without involving any transformation process. So if you buy something and you resell it in the same state, in the same form, this is commerce. And what you are selling is called, from your point of view, merchandise. And what you are buying is merchandise. Whereas if you have a transformation process, such as, well, in my case, what you buy, you call it raw material, you transform it and you get to finished goods, and you are selling finished goods, you are not selling merchandise. So again, for companies that are also into commerce or only into commerce, so they only sell merchandise without producing anything, those companies will not have charges with raw materials, but instead they will have important charges with the merchandise. So again, the types of charges that will be important in value will be the charges with the raw materials, gross wages, depreciation, rent, and merchandise. Again, as I was saying, most of the startups will probably register somewhere around 20-25 different types of charges, But from those, let's say 25 types of charges, these five will be the most important ones in value. They will probably represent somewhere close to 85%, 85% of the total value of the operating charges within any given year. So the rest of them, let's say the other 20 types of charges, will probably make for the remaining, who knows, 15 to 20%. Uh, this means that we need to be much more careful when estimating, when forecasting these five types of charges, and maybe we can afford to do some mistakes or maybe be a little bit superficial when we are forecasting the other types of charges. We don't need to, especially if we have time, but it depends. I'm planning to do the forecasting with you now in the 2.5 hours that we have at our disposal. In practice, many times I have months. I remember that I had a project for which I have worked even more than 1 year. But my point is that usually, if you have a month or two to prepare the feasibility study, you will probably get into much more detail. Uh, and even though, let's say that you are estimating a charge at 100 euros a month, it might be the case for many types of charges. Whether it's 100 euros or 90 or 110, that will probably not make a huge difference. But if you do a real study and if you have the time, at least me, uh, I usually want to get into details because that helps me understand better the nature of the activity, the details of the activity, of course, and I feel that it helps. But in regards to what happens usually in practice, I can assure you that the vast majority of the feasibility studies done in practice will not be done in such detail that yours will be. So by that I mean that the level of your feasibility study will be, I would say, significantly higher than the average on the current market in this field in for sure in Romania. So my point is that if you want to work in this field, I would say that you will be able to, and I have students that have learned with me to do this and are doing this in practice with very good results. Now, let's not waste any more time. I will get into it and I will start with the forecasting of the charges with the raw materials. I'm just going to copy the format of the table that I have used for the forecasting of the revenues. And well, maybe one adjustment could be helpful. I'm going to number the tables. It will be helpful later on. I'm going to say here two charges with the apples or with raw materials. Charges with raw materials. In my case, of course, apples. Uh, Important to remember, whatever information I will input from my keyboard, I will mark it in green, as I did last time we worked together for the forecasting of the revenues. So I will mark the cell in green, and I will be very careful so I would not introduce the same information twice. By that I mean in two different cells, because uh, we plan to do simulations, as I was saying, uh, on our last meeting the following week. So I need to know that I only need to change the values, the hypothesis. in the green cells, and that will change it all over the sheet with the financial forecastings. Now, on my last row, I want to get the yearly value of the charges with the raw materials. So here, how do I get to this value? Now, there are many ways, I guess. Let's say that I simply input here 100,000. I mean, that's a way to do it. I forecasted the charges with the raw materials for the first year at 100,000. You can't say that I didn't. However, it's not based on anything, right? So the probability of this happening is, I would say, 0. However, this is misleading because probably no matter how I do the forecasting, the probability of it coming to fruition, I mean, with 100% accuracy is 0. So what am I doing? My point is that there are different ways to forecast the raw material charges, and some are better than others. One could be that I simply invented the value right now. Another would be that maybe I thought, okay, if I want to do sales of 200,000, for those sales, surely I need to consume apples of 100,000. At least that's some connection. Then who knows? Maybe I dreamed it last night. It would be probably naive, but it could also be a way of forecasting things. Maybe I searched for something over the internet. Maybe I have consulted with other companies that produce apple juice, even though they have their own businesses, of course. However, if we think about it logically, what are the factors that will determine this value? Let's say that this first year will be 20, we are now in 2025, we need 2 years for the implementation. Let's say that we finish the implementation of the investment by the end of 2026, to simplify things. And the first year in our operating period will be 2027. So let's imagine ourselves at the end of 2027. We look in our, well, maybe at the beginning of 2028. We consult our profit and loss account, and we see a value for the charges with the raw materials, whatever it may be, 100,000 euros or more or less. That's not the point right now. The point is, for sure, that value would have been determined by something, by some factors. We are going to call them determining factors. Each charge will have its own determining factors. What are these for the raw material charges? Well, you might say, if the charges with the raw materials for 1 year represent the value in euros, in my case here, the value, the monetary value of the consumptions of apples, then one factor must be the total value of the consumption. Consumption of raw materials. Of course, in my case, measured in kilos. Depending on what types of raw materials you are consuming, it might be in whatever, meters, square meters, cubic meters, liters, and so on. Okay, so total, I might even say total consumption. Total consumption of raw materials. Okay, as I was saying, the charges, we can't reflect them into our accounting in kilos. They must be reflected in a currency. In Romania, of course, it would be in lei. So I need an instrument of evaluation, and that will be the acquisition price, not selling price, of course, I'm not selling them, acquisition price. So in lei, if I'm sorry, in euros or kilo, in my case. So by multiplying these two, I will get to the value of the consumptions, which is the raw material charge. Okay, let's say that the acquisition price for 1 kilo of apples, well, I need to forecast it. So I will come back to it. But what about the total consumption of raw materials? It's not really that hard to estimate it, even accurately, because I have to start. I already have my objective in terms of production. It's here. I'm planning to produce and sell 50,000 boxes of juice, which means as one box has 3 liters of juice, that means 3 times 50,000, 150,000 liters of juice. So let's start from there, because for sure the production volume is one factor. So production volume. In my case, I will measure it in liters. Now I already have it from last time. I'm seeing it now as an objective. I'm planning to produce and sell 50,000 boxes of juice. In order to do that, what's the value of the charges with apples that I will need to register? So let's start from here. 50,000 boxes times 3. Again, don't forget, in my case, it happens that a box of juice has 3 liters. So later on, when you will try to do your own forecasting, don't forget why I multiplied it by 3. It's very possible that in your case, you won't need to do that because you would already have the volume of production estimated here in your table with the income, the revenues. So again, for me, I'm planning to produce 150,000 liters of juice, apple juice, within the first year of operations. For sure, that would be a determining factor for the charges with raw materials. Okay, but how do I get from the volume of the production to the total consumption of raw materials? I need another factor, another parameter, which is what we call the specific consumption, which is the quantity of raw materials required to produce 1 unit of product. In my case, a liter of juice. I could have estimated it per juice box, but usually I would say in this field that's more natural. So I'm saying specific consumption measured in kilos of apples over liters of juice. Now, how do I estimate it? Actually, it should not be difficult. Of course, it's up to me. I can simply search over the internet what the specific consumption of apples for when producing juice. I will probably find some info. I have other sources. I'm already consulting with different equipment producers, so I can consult with them, and they might tell me, well, it's 2 kilos of apples for 1 liter of juice, which is about it. However, the equipment suppliers will give me information from the technical charts of the equipment. So that might happen in some specific conditions. I really need to know the specific consumption in my conditions because I need to know the real consumptions. So I might check with other producers. I mean, no one can stop me. I've done it in the past. I found no problem in obtaining information. So I would say it's my fault if I don't do the research. Uh, it would probably be a great idea for me to start a business in a field that I know about, where I already have experience. So hopefully I already know these things very well from my own experience. If not, at least, again, hopefully, I have employees. I already have people in my team that have experience in the field that I'm implementing the investment. So again, I would say the information is there. I would say it's simple to obtain, and it's only my fault if I don't have it, if I don't have it correctly. By that I mean, when we forecast the revenues, we underlined the fact that at least the demand from the market would be volatile and so much not under our control. But that's not the case here. I mean, as I was saying, we have means of knowing the specific consumptions. It's only our fault if we don't do the research. So, again, knowing it, I will say 2 kilos of apples for 1 liter of juice. And I have no reason of forecasting modification, any change in this value, in the value of the specific consumption throughout the forecasting period. So I'm done with that. Now, again, I know that for 1 liter of juice, I'm consuming 2 kilos of apples. I only need to multiply the production of juice with the specific consumption to get the total consumption of apples. It's as simple as that. Now, again, it's up to me to forecast the specific consumption correctly based on research. Of course, I should also include their normal technical losses I might lose throughout the year, a small fraction of the stored apples, but it's up to me. I can have that information, so it's only my fault if I'm not integrating that into my forecasting. So the risks here, in the case of the forecasting of the charges, is a lot more limited. I have a much better control over it. Okay, now about the acquisition price for the apples. It's not only up to me, but again, I can do the research. I can know the prices of today. No one stops me from having discussions with all the suppliers in existence. I mean, why wouldn't I? No one stops me to analyze the prices in the past, their evolution throughout the last maybe 3, 4, 5 years. But at the same time, the seasonality of the prices, because in my case, in this case for sure, there will be changes in the prices according to the season, that's for sure. I can tell you that in the past, in such fields, when I've done feasibility studies, I even signed pre-contracts with possible suppliers from the period in which I was preparing the feasibility studies. That doesn't give me a certain guarantee that I will be able to buy the apples in this case for that price, for sure. But my point is that even though no measure of forecasting will be certain, there are different levels of risk and uncertainty. So it's up to us to minimize the risk, and it's possible here. It's the factors, these three factors, the volume of production, the specific consumption and the price uh, are more obvious. Again, the physical the volume of production comes from the forecasting of the revenues, and it is of course based as well on the demand, which, as I was saying, is much more volatile. But in particular for the specific consumption and for the prices, the research is very important and greatly reduces the risk. So let's say that based on the research, based on the pre-contracts that I already have, possibly, I believe that I will be able to buy the apples for maybe what, 1 leu, just a bit over 1 leu, which is, let's say, 0.2 euros. Remember that we are doing the forecasting in real prices without inflation. I have no other reasons other than the inflation to estimate changes in the prices, and I'm not estimating inflation, which is why I'm keeping the same price, acquisition price, I mean, throughout the entire forecasting period. And as you can see, I'm done with the forecasting of the charges with the apples. So my suggestion is for you to do the same for your own project. Of course, if you are into production and therefore you have charges with the raw materials. Don't hesitate to use the round function. There's no point in estimating with decimals. We are not that accurate. So this table has two functions. Yes, one of them is to try to have a view of the real value of the charges. It's true. So we want to be accurate. But the most important objective is to understand the determining factors of the charge, to understand the relationships between the charge, its factors, and going further, the different causes, we are going to call them, the different causes that could determine a variation of each determining factor. This is important. So this means that we are going to come back to the table to do simulations. But for the time being, please see that the only two values that I have inputted from my keyboard are the specific consumption and the acquisition price, and they are both colored in green. For the first year, because for the following years, I took them within the formulas. So I'm going to do this throughout the entire sheet for the forecastings. Okay, I'll go on with the charges with the packaging. Packaging. I hope that I'm saying that correctly. Packaging materials, maybe. By that I mean the box, the bag and the box, of course. So charges with packaging materials. Now, I might just use the same format for the table. So I'm starting from the production volume, but this time there's no point in estimating it in liters because I'm selling the boxes of 3 liters. So I'm just going to say bagging box of 3 liters. And the volume that I'm planning to produce and sell is this one over here of 50,000 boxes. For the first year, of course. And this is the evolution that I establish as an objective for the following years. Now, okay, I can leave it like this, say specific consumption, boxes per unit. even though it's a bit silly because of course one unit will mean one box. But for you it might be different depending on what types of materials you are using. So now I can say total consumption of materials, boxes, well, bagging boxes. Of course, 50,000 for the first year. Acquisition price is euros for one bagging box. It will be negotiated for sure based on the volume. At this volume, honestly, I'm not 100% sure of the market prices, but I think it could be somewhere around 3 lei, maybe less because of the volume. So for the time being, I will imagine 3 lei, which is 0.6 euros. I might come back to change it just a little bit. But for the time being, I'm leaving it at 0.6. So I'm done with the charges with the packaging materials. And I will continue with the charges with the wages. Now, I'll say charges with the gross wages. I imagine that all of you will have them. So I will proceed in the same manner. On the last line, I will want to get to the yearly value of the charges. And now I need to understand the determining factors here. I mean, are they the same? If I travel in time, as I was saying in 2028, to see at the to check the profit and loss account, what will be the value of the gross wages? Let's say 50,000. How would the company get there to this value? Would this value be determined by the volume of the production, the 50,000 units bagging boxes? Well, honestly, it depends on the way that in which I plan to pay the employees. So let's say, more generally speaking, on my human resources policies. But although it's up to you, I can only say that statistically speaking, in the vast majority of the cases, the wages are not variable expenses. They do not depend on the production volume. They are almost all the time fixed expenses. No, what do I mean by that? I mean that in most of the cases, the employees have fixed wages per month. Yes, I know you can say, well, we know many cases in which even though the employee has a fixed wage, he also gets some percentage of maybe the value of the production or the value of the sales. Okay, there are some cases. You can also say, well, where there are cases in which the employee is paid 100% based on the volume of the production. There are, I've seen them in the past. I even had employees that I paid them some time ago when I was working into constructions by cubic meter of masonry, for instance. But in most of the cases, that's not so. In most of the cases, the employees have fixed wages. So it will be up to you. It's your decision. Me, I'm going to go for the fixed wages, which means that the determining factors would be the number of employees per of course, type of position, and the individual monthly wage. So I'm starting with the number of the employees. Number of employees. Let's see what kind of employees I need. I will say a manager. And based on my operating cycle, I should be able to, of course, associate different tasks with each position. I would imagine that a manager not only does the recruitment, the coordination of the planning, the coordination of the employees, the controlling, so the uh, specific tasks, functions of the management, but he could also be involved in dealing with, say, the suppliers as well as the customers. So I would not plan for a very complex employee structure, which, as I was saying, is usually not common for a startup. So I will say manager that does most of the administrative work. Let's imagine at least someone into marketing. So marketing specialist. But other than that, I will just skip to production. I need an analyst. That's the person that will program the production line and survey it. Then I need, I would say, at least two operators. One to always bring uh, Apple's raw materials within the production hall. At least another one into packaging. So I need at least two operators. I'm marking the cells from the first year in green, and I'm inputting here the number of employees for each position. One manager, one marketing specialist, one analyst, two operators. And at least me, I'm not planning to increase the number of these employees throughout the forecasting period. Now, you might think differently. For sure, in my case, the volume of production, of the planned volume of production increases. It increases a lot. So you might say that I would need at some point additional employees, or at least I would need to increase their wages. Again, it depends. It depends of where I'm starting from. Uh, it might be that these employees don't have that much work to do throughout the first year, where the production level is lower, and I get to use them more and more, of course, as the production level increases. It's up to you. I would keep these things simpler here, and I will. I'm not going to increase the number of employees throughout the years or the wages. So the wages, the individual wages would be the second factor. Monthly individual wages, gross wages. Now, the minimum wage in Romania right now is of 4,050 lei, which is what, about 800 euros. So by me, I'm imagining that we are doing this somewhere in the rural area. Let's say that I can pay the operators something close to the minimum wage, let's say 850. The analyst maybe 1,000. the marketing specialist 1,200, and for the manager, again, if we imagine this as a real situation in which the manager is probably the owner of the company, in most cases, at least at the beginning, he will not pay himself a very large wage. So let's say 1,000 for him as well. I need an additional row because I've set here monthly wages. So now I need the number of months for each period. Of course, that might seem silly, but sometimes it's not, because you might have situations in which you don't keep an employee all year round. You might only use some employees for, who knows, 6 months. It might be, the seasonality might be involved. For me, that's not the case. I'm planning to produce all year round. So now I believe I have everything. I'm just going to sum up the wages for all the positions. So I'm saying 12 months times some product of what? The number of employees by position times the individual monthly wages. And that's it. There you have it, 58,800 euros yearly wages and for all the employees. If there are any questions, please feel free to intervene and ask them.
No.
Okay. So I will go on with the social charges. Now remember, probably know, but just in case you don't know it 100%, remember that the gross wage, let's take the analyst for instance, with his 1,000 euros a month. The gross wage at first glance is belonging to the employee. However, the employee owes the state, let's say the public budgets, plural, different contributions and taxes. More specifically, he needs to pay 25% the social contribution. So basically, for most importantly, for his retirement fund. So 25% CEASE, right? Then it's 10% CEASS, the contribution for medical services. And it's another 10% of what's left, the tax, the income tax, the wage tax. So under these circumstances, he remains of the gross value. He probably remains with a net wage of somewhere about around 57, 58% of the value of the gross wage. But from the point of view of the company, there's only one charge, the charge with the gross wage. Even though the company doesn't pay the entire value to the employee, because if it did so, the employee would be forced to pay at his turn, to pay the different contributions and taxes to the different budgets. So the company retains the contributions of the employee and the income tax and pays them to the public budgets, the different public budgets. and only pays the employee the net wage. But again, it does the payments somehow in the name, let's say in the name of the employee, in a way. And within the financial accounting, the company only registers one charge, the charge with the gross wages. It doesn't register separately charges with net wages, charges with wage taxes, charges with the CAS and CASS contributions. But apart from these charges with the gross wages, so separately, the company registers these social charges that currently are at 2.25% of the value of the gross wages. So the determining factors for these are, on one hand, the total value of the gross wages, and the second factor, on the other hand, is the rate of 2.25%. The charges with the gross wages are the first determining factor, which we already have at this point. CAM in Romanian means contribuția asigurătorie pentru muncă. Its value as of the current date today is of 2.25% again of the gross wage fund. So by year it will be the value of the charges with gross wages times 2.25. I have no way of knowing for sure what the rate will be in 2027, 2028, and so on. What I can do is know the rate at the time of doing the forecasting on one hand, and at the same time I can look in the past. If I do so, the thing is that during the last 3, 4, maybe 5 years, the rate did not change. However, before getting to this 2.25%, the rate would change on a yearly basis, I meant to say. And it really changed a lot from year to year. So right now it seems to be stable, but no one can know for sure whether it remains the same throughout the entire forecasting period or not. But as we have established from the beginning, if we don't have any real reason to say that, to know that it might be, at least might be at 3% or 4%, we are just going to leave it at 2.25%. And of course, we explain this when we present the hypothesis of the forecasting. So whoever analyzes our forecasting and makes decisions based on it will know the limits of the forecasting, the framework within which he can judge these forecastings. So we're done with that as well. Now, as I don't have any rent charges, the next important charge, important in yearly value, for me would be the depreciation charges. So you will see that here we will have a larger table. I'm using the same format. So, what are the depreciation charges? The company will own fixed assets. Of course, it will, because this is where we basically started from. We configured our investment budget, and the investment would materialize in what would mean from the accounting point of view fixed assets, tangible and intangible assets. In my case, as you can see, of course, there's land, but apart from the land, there are constructions, equipment, furniture, computers, software, even the forklift. So, at the beginning, when procuring them, of course, we have these values. But will these values, for instance, will the value of the forklift remain the same throughout this entire forecasting period? I mean, after 5 years of usage, would I be still able to sell if I wanted to, of course? Would I still be able to sell the forklift for 18,000 euros after 5 years of operation? I mean, for sure not. And the reason for it is that, well, I'm paying 18,000 euros today for it. I would be paying if I were to decide to make the investment. Not because it contains a lot of metal, not because it's heavy or beautifully colored. I'm really paying for its potential of generating benefits for me. Right? From the economic point of view, that's really what I'm buying. I'm buying its potential to generate benefits. Now, this potential will not remain the same because over time, the forklift will depreciate from different points of view. There's one point of view, the physical, let's say the physical point of view. So there's going to be a physical depreciation, but there's also the moral depreciation, the physical depreciation. Of course, by using it, maybe it will start to rust. Some parts will start to break, maybe, which will lead to it requiring additional service time, maybe even additional consumptions for short downtime. And this would reduce its production capacity on one hand. On the other hand, it will increase the operating costs of it. Always changing parts, paying for services, and so on. So this is on one hand. But on the other hand, there's the moral depreciation. What's that all about? It's about the fact that in time, it's expected that better technologies would appear on the market. And just imagine that my competition uses newer technologies that, I don't know, maybe work faster, maybe with less resource consumption. For instance, of course, there might be ones that use less fuel, but I would say more importantly, in our present situation, there's a high probability of having in this case in 7 years, because the implementation takes 2 years. Then there's the 5 years of operations that we are forecasting. So there's a very high probability of having in even less than 7 years forklifts that don't need any operators, that work by themselves. So if that were to be the case, for sure that would decrease the operating expenses in terms of wages. Yes, we might avoid in this manner employing an additional operator. So for all these reasons, the fixed assets depreciate. So if they have a certain value today, in the case of the forklift 18,000, and at some point in the future their economic potential gets to zero or very close to zero, then from our point of view, their potential, which is what we are buying, their potential decreases, is being consumed. And from this point on, we have to treat it as any other consumption, as the consumption of raw materials. We need to register this consumption as a charge. So this is how we get to the depreciation charge. But how do we estimate the depreciation charge each month or each year? For the raw materials, it's easy. We know the quantity of raw materials that we have consumed, and we just register its value into the financial accounting. But what about the forklift? It's not very clear how much of its potential is being lost each month. So what we do is to simply imagine that from the beginning, to simply imagine that its lifespan, economic lifespan, that its economic lifespan is finite, and we try to estimate it. Let's say that we estimate it at 8 years, right? That is, we estimate that right now the value of the forklift is of 18,000, and by the end of the 8th year of operations, it will get to zero. And another assumption that we will make will be that there's a uniformity in the consumption of value. This is how we get to the linear method of depreciation. So from this point on, all we have to do is to estimate the lifespan of each fixed asset, and then forecast the charges with the depreciation for each such fixed asset by dividing the gross value of the asset over with the estimated lifespan. So this is what I'm going to put here in this table. Gross values of fixed assets. Now, mind you that not all the fixed assets are losing value. There's one exception. Well, there's one. I meant to say not all the intangible and tangible assets. The financial assets, there's a different story to them, and for sure we don't have any. So no point in losing time right now with them. But for the for the tangible and intangible assets, there's the exception of the land. Usually we consider the land not losing its value of their time, so there are no depreciation charges with the land. But apart from the land, all the others will depreciate. Now, there's another thing to be said. We have in our budgets some services. For instance, in my case, the services with creating the technical project, but there's also the tax for the construction permit that we would be paying to the city hall. We also, at least, well, I also planned in my investment budget services with the site monitoring, and at the same time taxes for the ISECE, for the Institute of the Inspectorate of the State in the Constructions field, ISECE, Inspectoratul de Stat în Construcții. So, at first glance, you might say that, well, these are current expenses. They should be registered into accounting at the time of the payment. However, that's not really the correct approach, because you see, these expenses would not be, these services would not be related to the revenues registered by the company within the year in which it would be paying for the services. Which is why we capitalize them. That means that we introduce them, we assimilate them within the values of the buildings. We are paying for these services to build the different buildings. So we assimilate the value of the services within the values of the buildings. So what I should be doing is to include these taxes and services proportionally within the values of all these constructions. However, so that I wouldn't create unnecessary confusion, I will simply integrate them within the value, the gross value of the production hall, which is the most important construction. So in a first stage, I'm taking the different types of fixed assets, with the exception of the land. I'm taking their values from my investment budget. Again, as gross values. And here for the production hall, I want to add the value of the different services and taxes. So the services for the technical project, the construction permit is, I put it here by mistake. So the value of the technical project, the services for the technical project, then the construction permit tax, I'm putting them here separately so that later on when you will use this as an example, you will have an easier time figuring out what they are. The site monitoring services, and the two different taxes for ISECE. And that's it. Excuse me for a second. So these are the gross wages at the gross values at the beginning of the forecasting period. I'm not planning to sell any of them throughout this 5-year period. I'm not planning to buy to procure any others. So I'm planning to keep these gross values for the entire 5-year period. There's no reason for you to do any different normally. Now I have to continue with the lifespans. Now I can only estimate, but when we do the estimations, which is usually when we buy an asset, and we register it into accounting. We usually use a catalog. There's a catalog of, well, I would say duration, but it's really intervals for different types of fixed assets, really imposed by the law for the calculation of the depreciation charges for, of course, fiscal purposes. So if you look it up over the internet, it's easy to find. It's this one from 2004. Basically, it's a table of about 30 pages with different durations. For instance, you can see here industrial buildings, which is what I have the production hall, between 40 and 60 years. So it's up to me when I register the production hall into accounting, so at the beginning, to establish the depreciation period. So I input it at 40 years. Same for the warehouse. So you can consult the catalog for the office building, also 40 years, for the platform about 20 years, same for the parking lot, fence, utility connections. For the production equipment, it's probably somewhere between 6 and 8, so I'm going to say 6. For the furniture, it's between 9 and 12, so I'm going to set it at 9. For the computers, you will see that it's between 3 and 5. I will set it at 3. For the software is maybe somewhere between 1 and 3. I will say 3. And for the forklift, I'm not sure, but it should be somewhere around 8. I'm going to put the link on the platform so you can use it if you want to, but most of you have similar types of fixed assets as myself, so you can already take them from my estimation. But just so that you get experience with it, you can check it out. And alternatively, you can put the link in ChatGPT and just paste in ChatGPT the list of assets, and ChatGPT will for sure find the correct durations for you. If you don't want to waste time, I mean, to look them up. So you can find it here. Again, my suggestion is to put the link in ChatGPT, paste the list of assets, and ask ChatGPT to suggest periods for each type of asset. But again, I believe in most cases you have assets similar to mine. Okay, I'm coming back to the forecast. So I have the gross values, I have the depreciation periods, and now I can calculate the depreciation for each asset, the yearly depreciation, of course. So for the production hall, I have a total gross value of 126,872 euros. So this over a depreciation period of 40 years. It's 3,172,000 a year. And I'm going to keep it for the entire forecasting period. The same for the rest, with two exceptions. I'm not hearing anything from you. Are you still there? Hopefully my internet connection is working. I hope you
Yeah,
can.
it's okay.
Yes.
You're there. So there are two exceptions because as you can see, the computers and the software, their depreciation periods end after 3 years. So make sure that if you have such cases, you don't forecast depreciation charges after that, after the end of the depreciation period. So other than that, it should be fine. At the end of the table, I can simply calculate the total of the depreciation charges. So as you can see, they remain the same for the first 3 years, and they are dropping a bit from the fourth year with the ending of the depreciation period for the computers and the software. For sure, these are fixed charges, as they do not, their value, their yearly value does not depend on the volume of production. Now, as I was saying at the beginning, these probably will be the most important charges in terms of value. You will see that. The rest, of course, as I was saying, there might be other 20, even more than 20 additional types of charges, but they will be lower in value. We can go on with maybe electricity. Now, be careful. Here, it might be different for you. When I work on a feasibility study, I usually work within a team with engineers, architects, and within this team, we will have at least one electrical engineer. And I will usually debate with him concerning the consumptions of electricity. It would be easy for him to estimate the electrical power of the entire plant. Basically, the electrical power of all the consumers. Light systems, equipment, production equipment, I mean, office equipment, and everything. So that's easy enough to estimate for him. But he wouldn't be able to accurately estimate the real consumptions of electricity. So the consumption is one thing, the power is a different thing. For the equipment, the production equipment, I try to talk to the suppliers, but they wouldn't know. Normally, they wouldn't know either. They know the power of the equipment, they have it in their charts, but when I try to talk to them about the real consumption, of course, they try to avoid the subject because they will say, how could we know? It depends on how you use it. Okay, it depends, but you have your experience, give me some statistics, something. So it would be helpful if I can have access to information from companies that already use that equipment. My point is that you will probably have different consumers. In my case, I'm going back to my plan. In my case, the most important consumers are the different equipments from the production line. So please understand that their consumption would be related to the volume of production. If I don't produce any juice, there would be no consumption of electricity from, of course, the part of the production line. If I produce a bit, or as I produce more, the consumption of electricity will probably increase proportionally to the volume of production. So the electricity charges, at least those related to the consumption of the production equipment, would be variable charges, so depending on the production volume. However, at the same time, I would consume electricity for the illumination system within the production hall. Same for the administrative building, the office building. I have, as I remember, 3 computers there that also consume some electricity. It's right. So my point is that a part of the consumptions would be directly related to the volume of production, so they would convert into variable charges, and another part would be not dependent on the production volume. They would be generating fixed charges. Now, one way to approach it would be to simply estimate them separately. So make one table for the variable charges with the electricity and another for the fixed charges. I can do it. However, if I think about it, the fixed charges with the electricity would be probably quite low. I mean, with the office space and the illumination for the production hall, they might get to somewhere around 150 lei a month, so let's say 30 euros. My point is that 30 euros a month means 360 euros a year. So it's 360 euros a year when I already have depreciation expenses of 26,000, charges with gross wages of 58, 59,000, raw materials of 60,000. So what's 360 euros? Compared to these, it's really not that much. So if I'm not that accurate, it's not such a big problem. So again, normally, honestly, I would estimate them separately. Just, for myself to see them, to understand them better. But if you estimate them all together, it really would not be a problem. So that's what I'm going to do. Electricity charges. So because in my case, most of them would be variable charges generated by the consumptions of the production line, I would simply treat them all as variable charges. And it would be close enough. Now, by treating them as variable charges, there's something here that I get this format. I'm deleting this row. By treating them all as variable charges, in my case, I will need to start from the production volume as I did for the estimation of the raw material charges. Production volume in liters, why not? I think it would be better. So I'm taking it within the formulas from the table in which I forecasted the raw material charges. I have the Sorry about that. So I have the production value. Now, for me, my production capacity, or rather the production capacity of the equipment, so of the line that is generating these electricity charges mostly, its production capacity was, that's the way I configured my investment, it was of 500 liters of juice an hour. So the the electrical power of the production line would be of approximately 20 kilowatts. That, however, doesn't mean that the line consumes 20 kilowatts hour an hour. It would probably consume somewhere around maybe 7 kilowatts hour. So let's say specific consumption. And I'm thinking about 1 hour of production in which I'm producing 500 liters of juice. Let's say that with the other less important consumptions, let's say that it is of 7 kilowatts. I'm sorry, kilowatts hour for 500 liters of juice, basically for 1 hour of production. It's 7. And I'm imagining it remaining the same for the entire forecasting period. So with these two factors, I am able to estimate the total consumption of electricity. Measured in kilowatts hour. So in my case, it's the volume of production, one for the first year, 150,000 liters over 500 liters, my hourly production capacity, times the specific consumption for 1 hour for 500 liters. So that's my total consumption, my yearly total consumption of electricity. Now I only need the price. Of course, measured in euros per kilowatt hour. They might differ, of course, from one supplier to the other, and of course, also based on the type of contract. But the last that I remember was of about 1.3 lei, which is 2.23, I guess. Let's see, euros. 0.26, there you go. Let's say 0.26. And of course, there will be fluctuations of the price in the future, but as I don't have any information that it will change at a certain specific value, I will keep it at the same level for my entire forecasting period. Now I have everything that I need. The yearly electricity charges will be of 2,100 kilowatts hour consumption times the value, the price, the acquisition price for 1 kilowatt hour of electricity. Always use the round function for the yearly values. I see no reason for us to estimate these values with decimals. We aren't, and we can't, and we don't plan to be that accurate. So that's it for me with the electricity charges, but please apply your own logics. It might be different for you. Maybe in your case, the electricity charges are mostly fixed charges. So if that were to be the case, you might just want to estimate a certain value per month times 12 equals the total value of consumption, over 1 year. Okay, so that's for the electricity charges. I will do the same for the charges with the water. Don't forget to register for the seminar. So this is again in my case. I don't believe that will be the case for most of you. But in my case, I need to consume a lot of water within the production process. Going back to this plan or chart, and if you remember, I have to wash the apples in the beginning stage of the production process. So there's water being consumed there. But maybe most importantly, I always need to wash the press. The most important equipment within the production line is the press. And in order for it to work, you need to wash it constantly. So there's a water jet washing the press at all times during the production process, which means that in about an hour, so again, judging it by the hour, in 1 hour, I would probably be consuming, I'm not sure, but somewhere around 300 liters of water, maybe. Somewhere around there, I believe. I'm not 100% sure, but I will go with that. So again, I'm starting from the production volume. I forgot a line here.
But if in my business I don't use too much electricity and water, and I pay a rent, and the utilities is included in the rent, need to um, put this information about the electricity and water if I have included on my rent.
Uh, let's take it one at a time. If you have rent, that means that you don't plan to include any buildings in your investment, I would imagine.
Yeah.
But hope that means that you invest in what? Equipment? What do you do?
I want to make a business about print T-shirt
So
printing.
printing. You are printing different types of messages, images on
Yeah,
t-shirts,
yeah, yeah.
and you plan to rent a space, but you invest in the equipment. And the equipment, is it that expensive? Do you get to investments of over 200,000 euros? What's the value of your investment approximately?
75.
I can't work with 75. We established that from the beginning. I want investments of at least 200,000 because the point of this is to learn how to evaluate them. So
Okay.
again, I'm sure that you can imagine businesses that don't need any investments, but the main point of this discipline is not to do the investment tomorrow, it's to learn how to configure it and to learn how to analyze it. So it's not really much to analyze there for an investment of 75,000. So please reevaluate the investment. Having said that, of course, if you use a rented space, you will estimate the rent. I would imagine that the determining factors for the rent are, on one hand, the surface area, the the area of the space on
Yeah.
one hand, the price for square meter per month times the number of months. So of course it's a fixed expense, but you have the determining factors are clear. So it should not be difficult to estimate. As for the utilities, I see no reason for them to be included in the rent. I mean, they sometimes are, they could be, but as this is as we are doing a theoretical study, I see no reason of hiding them. So I see no point in including them in the rent. So estimate them separately, please. Uh, if you do what you say you do, I would imagine that the electricity expenses would be variable. They would be depending on the number of t-shirts that you do.
Yeah.
However, the expenses with the water and sewage services, as well as the possible expenses with the heating, would be fixed expenses in your case. So estimate the electricity expenses in the same manner that I did, but forecast the water, sewage, and heating expenses in a fixed manner. So a certain value per month. I will do the same maybe for the heating expenses, maybe. Okay, so I'm coming back to my water charges. I'm starting from the production volume again, and the specific consumption of water, I'm going to measure it also by the hour. So for 500 liters of juice that I'm producing by over 1 hour. But I'm measuring, of course, the specific consumption in liters of water. And I'm guessing that it's about 300 liters. However, now the total consumption of water, there's no point in measuring it in liters because you are not usually paying for in liters, you are paying in cubic meters. So the total consumption, I'm going to measure it in cubic meters. I'm not sure if I write cm, whether will be comprehensible in English. I hope it will. But now I have to divide whatever I calculate here by 1000, right? 1000 liters of water is 1 cubic meter. So it's 90 cubic meters for me in the first year, and it probably goes up to, there you go, 257. Now, the price for 1 cubic meter of water, of course, depends on the supplier. For instance, in Timișoara at Aqua Team, it probably is of just about a bit over 8 lei. 8 lei is what? Is 1.6 euros. So, as far as I can remember, the prices for most of the suppliers, I mean, it's not like I know all the suppliers, but in the cases that I do know, it's somewhere between 7 and 8 lei. So let's say that 1.6 should be enough. But as you can see, it really doesn't make any difference whether it's 144 euros a year or it's 140 or 50 or 60. It doesn't really change anything. Okay. Now, if I have water charges, if I consume water, I probably need to evacuate the water in some sewage system. Some of you might have planned for septic tanks. Maybe you included them in your investments. If that's the case, so be it. But in my case, I planned to evacuate the water in a sewage system. So I need to pay for it, for the service. Meaning that I will estimate charges with sewage services, the sewage. Is that right? Hopefully. So how do I estimate them? Again, as you can see, the effort is not really worth it because the values will not be significant. But just in theory, how do I estimate them? Well, usually the thinking is that all the water that I would be using, I would evacuate it back into the sewage system. So this is how the supplier would estimate the volume of water evacuated. Which is why I'm starting from the volume of water that I have already forecasted in the previous table, total consumption of water. That's not right because it seems like it's centimeters. So total consumption of water. Now, there's one other thing. On my land, of course, throughout the duration of the year, there's going to be rain, and the rainwater is also going within the sewage system. They also make me pay for that. But let's not complicate matters even more. It doesn't really make a significant difference. I'm just going to stick with the water that I have estimated as being consumed. So I'm starting from the total consumption of water, then I need the price. The price for the sewage services, which is very close to the price of water usually. So if the price for the water was 1.6, I will say 1.5 for the sewage services. So that's it. I also use gas. And as you can see, of course, in the investment that we simulated together, we took into consideration the gas connection. But the truth is that I use gas. Well, I might also use it for heating, but I mostly use it into production for the pasteurization process. I'm not sure how to spell the word correctly, but you get my point, for boiling the juice. And that would make the consumption of gas really variable. So I'm gonna use this type of table that I have used for the water and electricity charges. So gas charges. Again, I'm starting from the production volume. The specific consumption of gas in cubic meters. I'm not really sure, but I believe it's just a bit over 1 cubic meter per 500 liters of juice. It should be somewhere around there. Total consumption of gas. I don't need to divide it by 1000 anymore. The price I believe last time that I checked was somewhere around 3.5 lei for 1 cubic meter. 3.5 means what in euro? 0.7. Okay, 0.7. So now we also have the gas charges. So we've estimated raw materials, packaging materials, gross wages, social contributions, depreciation, utilities. Now we might get to the taxes. So I'll start with the land tax, as again the company will own land. Now the determining factors for the land tax are a bit more complicated because the first of all you pay the land tax, the building tax, the taxes on cars or trucks. You pay them to the local city hall, so they go to the local budget, and that means that the local budget has some authority into establishing its level. For the building taxes, it's, I guess, a bit simpler for the companies. You will see in a moment. For the land, however, it takes into consideration the position of the land, I mean, the zone, the type of land, I mean, the usage, the type of usage. So it could be, well, not that straightforward, but I will try to make it simpler, and I will simply relate the value of the tax to the value of the land. That's not 100% correct, but it should be accurate enough. So I will say value of the land. Again, remember we are talking about land and building that the company will own. If you are renting the space, land and building, it's the owner that pays the rent, the tax, not you. The value of the land, I'm going back to my investment budget. In my case, it's of 30,000 euros. And I'm not planning any changes throughout the forecasting period. It will remain, as far as I can tell right now, at 30,000. Now, sorry. So I will try to estimate it as a percentage on the total value, the gross value of the land. Maybe somewhere around 0.1 or 0.2%. Okay, now for the building tax. The fiscal code establishes ratios really within an interval between 0.08% to and 1.3% yearly, I mean, applied to the gross accounting value of the building. each local council, so if you wish, if City Hall will establish the rate of the tax within this interval. There are exceptions. For instance, Timișoara is one. It increased the value of the tax rate by 50%. I mean the maximum value. So it's not even 1.3%, it's 1.95% a year. So value of the buildings. That's one determining factor. For me, I will sum it up from the depreciation graphics chart, depreciation chart. And in principle, the value will stay the same. Now the rate will depend, as I was saying, on the city. So if it's Timișoara, it's 1.95%. If it's not Timișoara, it might be 1.3. In my case, I'm somewhere in the rural area. I will leave it at 1.3. You can check for yourself to see what the rate is in the area where you are planning to do the investment. Okay. Finished with the taxes, the local taxes. I don't have any cars or trucks. If you do, the taxes are, as you probably know, usually connected to the engine capacity. So search it over the internet. You will find calculators over the internet. And of course, you will know your engine capacity because you configured your investments yourselves. We could continue now, maybe with different services, maybe with the accounting services. Let's see. So as you have seen, I'm not planning to hire an accountant. I will be outsourcing the accounting services. There's no secret here. I will just take into consideration a certain monthly fee. And it depends a lot, of course, on what the company does, or rather on the complexity of its activity, and from that, on the complexity of the accounting system of the company. So if it's a very small company doing services, maybe having 1 or 2 bills a month, it could be as low as 300 lei, 400 lei a month. But if it's a production activity such as my own, which involves, of course, always buying raw materials, registering the raw materials, the inventory. Of course, I also have 4 or 5 employees, so you have to calculate the wages, pay the taxes for the wages and the contributions and so on. Register the finished goods, maybe even do some costing. So maybe for such a company with this volume of production, it could get to maybe 2000 lei a month, somewhere around there, maybe more, maybe less. So I will say 400 euros. And the charges with the accounting services, of course, the product within the two. Of the two, I mean. Now I'm going to use the same format for other services, such as communications, telecommunications, phone internet access wouldn't be that much, maybe 20, 40, 30 euros, and that's it. Same format for the charges with the promotion services. Please connect this with your marketing strategy, your promotion policy. There, I have asked you to forecast yearly budgets. So you simply take the monthly fee from there. In my case, let's say somewhere around 500 euros. What else? I would probably need insurance for the buildings. Other than that, services, maintenance services for the equipment, even for the building, for the constructions in general. What else? Shipping services. I don't have a truck. If I would have invested in a truck, I would register, of course, charges with the depreciation of the truck, with the tax on the truck, the wage of the driver, insurance for the truck, services, maintenance, I mean, different spare parts. But as I don't plan to own a truck, I have to outsource the service for the delivering, because I imagine that it would be the suppliers that would bring the apples to me. To simplify things, of course, but for delivering the products, I will need to pay for the services of a specialized company. So let's estimate those charges. Charges with the transportation services for delivery, for delivering the finished goods. These charges would be variable, and maybe one way to forecast them would be to simply really start from the volume of the sales, which I have in the first table right here, line number 13. It comes from D13. That should be right. Okay, I have the volume of the sales now. I could imagine simply the volume for one transport, maybe the capacity of a truck, average volume for one delivery, maybe. Measured in boxes, so be careful in your case. It might be measured in kilos, cubic meters, or whatever. So let's say that the average volume of one shipment would be of maybe, let me think, be somewhere between 2 and 3,000 boxes. Let's say 2,000 boxes. Three. It's too much if it's an average. So 2,000. So number of shipments. 50,000 over 2,000. So that's it. Let's use the round function. Round up maybe. Right, and I can either imagine an average distance for each shipment, or I can simply imagine an average fee for one shipment. Let's not complicate things anymore. Could be around a few hundred euros, maybe. Okay. What else? As I was saying, maybe insurance. There are small things. There are materials, of course, for office materials. And maybe it's enough as an example. It could be enough. Now, I'm going to try to build an operating budget, a budget of revenues and charges. So I'm going to make some space here at the beginning. And in the budget, I'm going to put all the types of revenues and charges. Now, uh, there's one additional thing to be said for the revenues. Yes, we have the revenues from the selling of the apple juice, but there is another type of revenue that we are going to all register because we have all used for financing our investment subsidies. We have to forecast the revenues from the subsidies. Now, what's that all about? In my case, there's the structure of my financing sources, and I see that it's not complete for some reason. Either I didn't finish it, either someone deleted whatever I had here, which might be the case, but that's not very important right now. So let's do it again. Bank loan leasing subsidies. Let's see eligible expenses. I imagine that I would finance this investment through the regional program, one of the components of the regional program, and that the eligible expenses would include for sure not the land, but the technical project, the construction permit, so everything up to the forklift probably. With the site monitoring and the taxes for the construction. And for the bank loan, not sure what I'm financing. The leasing finances the forklift, that's clear. So I'm registering here all the eligible expenses. And let's say that 50% of these other 76% of these could be financed through subsidies. So the rest of the eligible expenses I'm going to finance them through the bank loan. And I'm going to use equity to finance the non-eligible expenses, such as the land. And that's it, the land. Fine. So now, the point is, my feasibility study, my application form with the feasibility study, so my project is selected for financing through subsidies, and the implementation period really starts. I received the subsidy, so ADRE West or another agency pays the subsidy into my account somewhere during the implementation period. But I'm not registering from the accounting point of view. I'm not registering revenues from subsidies throughout the implementation period. So at the moment of collecting the subsidy, of getting the subsidy. The accounting process is such that, it involves registering the revenues from the subsidies when you consume the assets that are being financed from the subsidies. And of course, in this case, we are talking about investments, so about fixed assets. Their consumption is being reflected into our accounting system through the depreciation charges, when, of course, during the operating period. So really, for some of them, as it's the case for the production hall, the depreciation process would take 40 years. And because of that, we will register revenues from subsidies for the entire 40-year period. I'm going back to the forecasting of the charges, to the depreciation chart, and I need to make some space here. Revenues from subsidies. So I have to start with the depreciation charges. Now, each month, as I register the depreciation charges into the accounting, so 6811 to 281 or 280 for the tangible and intangible assets. At the same time, I register the revenue from subsidies, and I reduce the balance of the subsidies account for 175 to 7584. So if the assets would be 100% financed through subsidies, each month, and obviously that way each year, I would recognize subsidies as revenues equal to the value of the depreciation, but as at least part of the fixed assets that are being depreciated here are financed through other type of financing sources than subsidies, I have to take that part out of the equation. So from these depreciation charges, well, based on their value, I have to recognize subsidies as revenue, but only at the level of the financing ratio from the subsidy, which was, of course, 76% for me. rate of financing from subsidies. And therefore, the revenues from subsidies would be 76% of the yearly value of the depreciation charges. Sorry. Okay, I'm going back to the budget, to the operating budget. And this will take maybe 2 or 3 minutes. I'm going to link the budget to each table. It won't take that long. Total operating revenues. Charges with raw materials. It should be table number 2. Okay. Wages 4. Social charges, table number 5. Depreciation charges, table number 6. This right here. Electricity charges 7. This is it. Water charges 8. Sewage services 9. Gas charges 10. Land tax 11. Building tax 12. Accounting services 13. Communication services 14, table 14. Promotion services 15. Transportation services 16. Office materials 17. Now, to that I have to add the charges with the bank fees, which we estimated in the reimbursement chart for the bank loan. But remember that in principle, the bank loan, we get it at the beginning of the implementation period, whereas this forecasting period starts at the end of the implementation period. So year 1 within this forecast of ours is really, well, more or less, with approximately year 3 in this reimbursement chart. So let's first calculate the principal payments, interest payments, and fee payments by year. So for the first year, we have these first 12 months, the principal payments. I drag to the right to calculate the interest payments and the fees. month 24, if I paste the formula, it should calculate the payments for the second year. Month 36, that should be the third year. Month 48, the fourth year, and month 60, the fifth year. Now, I'm not really interested in the principal payments. These are not charges. This is just returning the capital. I'm interested in the interests and the fees. These are charges. So let's see, interest for the first year, fees. Let's say implementation 1, the first year of implementation, the second year of implementation, year 1 of operations, 2 and 3. And of course, this is what interests us. So second year, interest and fees. That's not right. Third year, fourth year, and the fifth year of reimbursement, the last year. And we should be done now. I'm going to do the same. I'm just going to copy the formulas for the reimbursement chart for the lease contract. J11 starts there. And it should be fine. And now I'm just making some space within the operating budget here for the bank fees. That's for the loan. Remember that the last 3 years are the first 3 years of operations. So taking the bank fees and I'm putting them within our operating budget. The reimbursement ends here. Now I can calculate the total of the operating charges. And now the profit or loss from operations. Operating. Profit or loss, the result of the operating activity. Operating revenues, total operating revenues, less the total operating charges. Okay. Now, if you imagine the profit and loss account, after the operating activity, we have the financial activity with financial revenues and financial charges. Normally, there's no reason for me to forecast financial revenues, and I didn't, and I won't. There, I wouldn't see any reasons for you to forecast financial revenues as well, either. For the financial charges, most of them again, no reason to forecast them, as we don't do the forecastings under inflation conditions. But we at least need to put within the operating budget. Within the budget, it's not an operating budget anymore. In fact, let's call it differently. We at least need to put here the interest charges, which are financial charges. For the bank loan and for the lease contract. For the bank loan, we have them right here. Again, don't forget to correlate the periods. In this case, it's really the last 3 years of the reimbursement chart. And the same for the leasing contract. So now we can calculate the gross operating profit or loss. I'm sorry, gross profit or loss, not operating. Overall. Operating result less the financial charges, as there are no financial revenues. Then the tax. It would be either an income tax or a profit tax. The limit is set by the value of the sales, so you can be taxed based on your sales up to sales of 500,000 euros per year, which is the case for me for the first 4 years, which means that, again, in my case, let's say income tax slash profit tax. Well, say if, simplify things, if the volume of the sales is less than 500,000, I will pay 1% of the value of the sales. Else, I will pay 16% of the gross profit. And I use the round function. Okay. So net profit or loss, gross profit or loss less the tax. And that's it for the budget of revenues and charges. Let's make it beautiful. And there's one last thing to do. It's gonna take 5 or 6 minutes and then we're done. From the budget of revenues and charges, I want to get to a cash flow statement. First, I'm just going to copy the structure of the budget. And I'll even copy the values. I don't want these. In fact, I'm not interested in the interest charges. I'm just going to build the cash flow statement for the operating activity. That's what interests us. But I have to add the income tax. So if in the first table in the budget, the point is to calculate and explain the profit or loss or the result of each year, which is of course the difference between the revenues and the charges. In the second table, I want to calculate and explain the net operating cash flow, so the money surplus generated each year, which means that I have to compare the cash inflows and the cash outflows. So I'm not interested in revenues anymore. I'm interested in cash inflows. Now, if I have sales of 200,000 euros, that doesn't mean that I have cash collections, cash inflows of 200,000, because I might sell during the first year and collect at least a part of the sales. I might collect it during at the beginning of the second year if I offer trade loans. But my suggestion is not to complicate things and to imagine that what we sell we collect within the same year, and more or less the same for the charges. You will see. So for the sales, I'm going to leave it like this. Now, concerning the revenues from the subsidies, as I have explained, it's just a way of registering them into accounting, of recognizing the revenues. But the cash collection, we collected the cash sometime before, during the implementation period. So there are no inflows from subsidies within the operating period. It's the same for the depreciation charges. We paid for the assets. Now we are just registering the consumption, their consumption, but we are not paying anything to anyone. So this disappears as well. So instead of charges, I'm just going to say payments. Or in this case, raw materials. Cash outflows. From operations, including the payments for the profit or income tax. And for each year, the difference between the the inflows and the outflows, the net operating cash flow. So the surplus or the deficit of cash. Difference between the cash inflows and the cash outflows. And that's it. So this is where we stop today. Now it's very important, as the following week we will have our last meeting. It's very important for you to get in the same position, because the following week we are going to use the net operating cash flow that we just forecasted, and of course you will forecast hopefully during the weekend. We will use this yearly net operating cash flow, compare it to the value of the investment, to, as I was saying at the beginning of the class, build several indicators that you might already know, such as the net present value, the internal rate of return, the payback period. And based on them, we will be able, hopefully, to evaluate the financial feasibility of the investment. After doing so, we will have to do simulations, change the different variables marked in our sheets in green, and see the impact of that on our financial indicators, and analyze the risks of those changes taking place into the future. So if you have questions, if you believe that I can assist you in any way in doing the same thing that I did today, please go ahead. Do you believe you will have any difficulty in doing the same? Of course, you will have access to this sheet. As you have seen, I've started it from scratch. I've done it from the beginning in front of you. Everything is registered, so you can look back at everything that I did. I would imagine that Google will process the recording for an hour or two, but later on I will put the link on our platform. So you will be able to see it again if you need to. You have access to my Google Sheet. Please just don't delete it. Other than that, I'm leaving you access. If you want to, you can just copy the tables that suit you, because I'm sure that you will all have charges with the gross wages, with the social services, social charges, I mean. You will all have charges with the depreciation of the fixed assets. I would imagine that many of you will have charges with the raw materials, with the promotion services, with accounting services. So I have no problem in you copying the tables from me, the tables that we've done together today, and adapt them to your own forecasting. Again, if you have questions, or if you believe that you need my assistance for anything, but what's important is for you to get to the same point by the next Friday. Anyone?
Sorry, one question. Do we have to load the sheet that we do?
No, you don't have to upload it for the following week, because, as you understand, you will probably make changes on Friday once we do simulations. So no, you don't have to upload it yet. Maybe on Friday, maybe you will send me the links while we work, so we can adjust them, the forecastings, I mean, together. But have them ready because we will work on them on Friday.
But we can use the same Google Sheet that we have already on the platform.
Yes, of course. Yes, of course. You can just continue doing tables the way that I did. You can, as I said, even copy the tables from me and adjust them, adapt them to your own activity in the same sheets. So yes, you are right. In fact, I already have
Yes,
access
because
to
we
this
already
sheet.
have the forecasting. We have started over there.
Yes, you are right. Well, at least some of you forecasted the revenues there. So yes, you can continue with the forecasting of the charges, and I will have access to the sheets.
Okay, thank you.